Hello, this is Aunt this is Alicia Salzman. When she used to be a nun, when did you become a nun?
1956, I think.
Okay, so...
It was a different world.
Different world to everything.
Yeah. When I graduated from high school, it was women didn't have all this kind of freedom. You could either be a teacher, a nurse, marry, or a secretary.
Okay.
I didn't want to do any of that.
So
I knew this group of nuns who worked with the poor, and they were not like the teaching nuns. I went to Catholic school all through high school, and these nuns were not like that.
Mm-hmm.
They went out all by themselves and took care of their patients. They were tough. Tough women. I mean, the nuns you had at school, they didn't go anywhere. They went from their convent to the school, taught you for 5 hours a day or something, and then went back to their convent. These nuns that I joined, we went out every day, like at 9 o'clock. We did our prayers, we went to breakfast, we got our sandwiches ready for the day, and went. We went to subways, buses, walked.
Just helping people like...
Well, people were referred to us. Like if they didn't have nursing homes, they didn't have a lot of stuff for people who were housebound, homebound, or whatever.
So no, like, social organizations that we have now, and it would fall upon the nuns to do it?
Yeah, so we went out, we went to people who maybe their family called up the convent and said, my mother's had a stroke, can you go visit her? So we had a supervisor, and she would go and see,
make sure everything was legit.
Yeah, and sometimes we would see maybe 4 or 5 people a day. It was exhausting.
It sounds like it.
We'd have our lunch, we'd have our nursing bag, and the people had to be poor. You couldn't go to people who could afford
actual care. Like, this was for people that could not help themselves. Right. They were...
So, you can see how different it is, but we would go on the bus. We were dressed in habits, and we would go on the bus, and some of the bus drivers would put their hand over the coin box that we didn't have to pay. I mean... Really?
You got a free ride because you were a nun?
And they knew us because the bus went past our convent. So they saw all the people, all the nuns coming out, going everywhere.
Okay.
So anyway, that's what we did.
So your day pretty much was pray in the morning, get things ready, and then go help people, come back, eat, pray, and then...
Well, sometimes we got...
home and just passed out. You're like, I'm tired.
I don't have to go in. I mean, we were so tired, we'd all get in the kitchen. It was, the convent had all nuns there. I mean, the convents that I stayed at were all different, but this one had a lot of old sisters. So they were praying, and we were just coming home and eat and go to bed.
So when I think of nuns, like from like TV and like books, I usually think of the older nun that just sits there, pray, and gives condolences. Was it because you were a younger person, they sent you out more?
Some of the old nuns, they went to people who maybe just needed somebody to visit, and they would go and fix a cup of tea and sit and talk to them.
The easy jobs, because they couldn't do as much as the younger nuns.
Yeah.
Oh.
But most of them went out.
Went out, helped, and did things. So it sounds like the convent was very much part of the community.
Yes and no. I mean, depending on where the convent was.
Right.
In the city, they weren't much of a community, but like in Detroit and Cincinnati, most of the neighbors knew the nuns and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what else do you?
How many convents were you at? Because it sounds like you were at a few.
I was one in Ossining, the city of New York. I went part-time. I took a class in rehabilitation, and so I stayed at this one convent that was in Manhattan. I didn't do any work out of there.
You just kind of used it as a home to go to class.
Yeah. I came out here, Detroit, here, Ossining, New York City, Long Island. I was in Long Island. There's probably 6 or 7 different convents.
Wow. Did you leave the convent? Why did you leave the convent?
Because they sent me out here, and I said, I'm not going back to New York.
You're not going back to New York, so that's the entire reason. It wasn't because of any differences or anything. It was just...
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't understand why we had 70 acres. And I said, well, you can't divide the property. They said that was too much. Nuns shouldn't have 70 acres. They couldn't understand. And at that point, we had a dog, we had 2 cats, we had a goat, we had chickens.
This property right now, right? We
were in Jellicoe, Campbell County, Tennessee.
Campbell, okay. You and Pat?
And 2 others, but they had left the convent already.
So you guys were just, after you guys left the convent, did you still help or what?
Well, when I got here, some people knew I was a nurse, or Pat was a nurse. We took blood pressure. They called us up, what do you think? You know, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Should I go to the doctor?
What was the year you left the convent, if you can remember?
Well, we moved here in 1976.
So, that year. Yeah. Okay.
That was hard to leave the convent, but a lot of the old nuns understood, you know, that life had changed from when they entered.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the nuns came out here and visited us, and
yeah.
Anyway, I mean, it's like the army.
Yeah.
You go and do all this stuff together, and they're all your friends, and you call them up and say, how are you doing?
How are you doing? I'm in town, or hey, they're in town, and they stop by, and you guys have tea or food. So it sounds like it was a good time, and it's a lot different.
It was. I am closer to some of those women than my family.
I get that. So,
I mean, when we get together, we say, do you remember, you know, and we had some crazy nuns.
Crazy nuns?
Really, I mean, overly religious. There was-
Zealots?
they really maybe were. But they didn't go out. I mean, I don't know their stories.
Right. Yeah, and can't
So,
talk on someone you don't know
one
their
night-
story.
A local.
At jail?
Listen to it. Anyway, I got to visit this young man in the warden's office. I didn't have to
Go down to the cell block or where they kept the other prisoners because you were a nun. So, was the treatment you guys got due to the fact that a lot of the country was more religious back then? Yeah, I'm not saying that the country's not religious.
Well, like now, there are hardly any nuns anywhere.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
there
don't-
were a lot of different communities of different nuns. And they were respected because I guess religion was respected.
more important to the daily life back then than
I'm not even going to church.
you cleaned the church. You,
Yes, I did squeeze.
right. I'm not saying like I don't go to church, and I know a lot of people who don't go to church, but I don't see, probably back in your day you saw
Everybody went to church. I mean, the
Yeah.
Jewish people went to church, the Protestants, the Catholics. I was brought up in a Catholic neighborhood, sort of. There were a couple of Jewish families, but there were Irish, Italian, German. It was so different.
yeah
We didn't have
smartphones that I'm recording you on.
right.
Yeah.
We didn't have anything.
You had a notebook, paper, and a pencil or a fountain pen.
That was it.
Right.
And you wrote out the directions,
Yeah.
take number 10 bus. And I always went to the bus driver, make sure you let me out.
Like, please, I don't know where I am.
And one time I went, and this was really interesting because I went on a bus. I was the only white person on the bus. And it made me think how black people must feel when they have to go to a white neighborhood.
Right, because this was before segregation really
Yeah.
kicked off, or a lot of those movements that we have.
This was probably in the early 60s.
Right.
No, I went to college in 60, 64.
So,
Nursing.
so it was a different time back then, and it is interesting just to see how different it is from today.
Yes.
Hey.
And then I think, when you see women with their kebabs or whatever.
Hijabs. You're talking about the hijab.
I was almost like that.
Right.
I had a habit.
Yeah. There is some interesting studies on, like, just the coverage of women with religious clothing and the reasonings.
Yes.
But
We had, when the group was founded in 1910 in Lower Manhattan in New York, they had, you just saw their face. They had this stuff, and then they had this big hood like on.
Mhm.
And then when they, probably another 20 or 30 years later, the nuns drove, because when I was in Austin, you had to drive.
yeah,
When I was in Long Island, you had to drive. When I came here, you had to drive. So they cut this thing short, and it was like a heart shape. I'll have to show you a picture.
I would love to see a picture. But yeah. Oh, hello, Sophie.
So, most nuns had to have a companion. We never had companions. We went out all by ourselves.
And the companion would be like a priest or
No, another nun.
another nun. So it would be two nuns working, but you usually worked alone
Yeah.
unless the patient or person required to have two people to help.
No, not.
No?
You had to have. You had to do what
You had to go to the neighbor and be like, "Hey, I need a hand."
You didn't get it.
You didn't get a hand, but yeah. It's just that's interesting.
Turn that off.